We saw a deer with antlers made of bone, not its own. It stood at the edge of the clearing like something that had grown there, pale and silent beneath the old trees. For a moment none of us spoke. The forest had already trained us to keep our voices low. But this was different. This was the kind of quiet that felt imposed. The air was cold enough to sting the inside of my nose. Damp moss coated the ground in thick patches, swallowing our footsteps. Somewhere deeper in the woods a branch cracked, but it sounded distant, almost careful. The deer didn't move. Its body was normal enough. Lean winter muscle, dark fur dusted with frost. But the antlers rose in wrong directions. Not the smooth, branching symmetry of a stag's crown. These were jagged, mismatched bones lashed together in a lattice of pale shapes. Ribs, finger-length shards, curved fragments that might once have been part of a skull. They had been fitted onto the deer's head like a crown assembled from a graveyard. "Those aren't antlers," Mira whispered. No one answered. The forest around the clearing seemed older than anything we had passed on the hike in. The trees were thick and uneven, their trunks bending slightly away from the open space as if they had grown around something they preferred not to touch. Between the roots, the moss glittered with small pale flecks. Bone fragments. Not many, just enough to notice once your eyes adjusted. The deer watched us with the calm attention of an animal that had already decided something about us. I felt the sensation then, not quite fear yet, but a pressure, like the woods had leaned closer. We had come out here because the map said nothing about this place. 4 days into the interior of a forest so old that even the logging companies had left it alone. No marked trails, no cabins, no signal since the second morning. Just ridges of dark trees and cold streams that ran over black stone. The kind of forest that looked quiet from satellite images. But once you walked inside it, you realized the quiet had shape. "Maybe someone did that," Jonah said softly. "Like a hunter, a marker or something." "For what?" Mira asked. The deer took one slow step forward. The bones on its head shifted faintly against each other with a dry clattering sound. I realized then that none of them were attached properly. They had been arranged, interlocked, as if something had studied the shape of antlers and attempted to recreate them from memory. The deer lowered its head, and for an instant the bones formed a silhouette that didn't belong to any animal I knew. Longer, broader, like the crown of something much larger. Then it lifted its head again and the illusion broke. The clearing went quiet in a deeper way. No birds, no insects. Even the breeze seemed to avoid the place. The deer turned slowly and walked into the trees. The bone crown swayed with each step. "Wait," Jonah said, though none of us had suggested following. But we did anyway. Not because we wanted to, because the deer walked just slowly enough that we could keep it in sight. Branches brushed our jackets. The undergrowth thickened. The air grew colder beneath the canopy. Light filtered through in dull gray beams that seemed to bend around the trunks. Every few steps I noticed more bones in the moss. A small vertebra, a broken jaw from some animal I couldn't identify. None of them looked fresh. They were clean, pale, carefully placed, like breadcrumbs. The deer stopped again in another small clearing. This one was darker. The trees leaned inward so tightly that the sky above looked like a narrow wound in the canopy. The deer stood in the center. The bones on its head rattled faintly. "Do you hear that?" Mira murmured. At first I thought she meant the bones. But then I heard it too. A sound like distant breathing. Slow, rhythmic. Not from one direction. From everywhere. Jonah shifted his weight and the moss squelched under his boot. The sound seemed too loud. The deer turned its head slightly. And that's when I realized the bones weren't random. They were arranged into patterns. The longer fragments curved outward like antlers, but inside them smaller bones had been threaded together with thin cords of something dark and fibrous. Roots. The forest had grown into them. "Something made that," Mira whispered. The deer's ears twitched. The breathing sound grew louder. The trees around the clearing creaked softly, as though bending. Then something moved beyond them. Not a shape, just the sense of mass shifting where nothing should have been. The deer lowered its head again. The bone crown aligned into that larger silhouette once more. And this time the forest responded. The breathing stopped. The silence thickened. From the darkness between the trunks, faint pale shapes began to appear. At first I thought they were stones. But stones don't move. They were bones. Dozens of them, half buried in moss, leaning against roots, suspended in the low branches by thin strands of vines. Skulls from animals I recognized and some I didn't. Ribs, femurs, curved fragments like broken crescents. They were arranged in rough arcs around the clearing, facing the deer, facing us. Perimeter. Jonah, I whispered. He didn't answer. He was staring into the trees behind the deer. I followed his gaze. The forest there was darker than it should have been. The shadows between the trunks weren't empty. They had depth, and something inside them shifted with the slow patience of something enormous. A branch cracked somewhere deep in that darkness. Then another. The deer stood perfectly still. Its bone crown tilted slightly, as if listening. The shadows moved closer. Not walking, sliding. Trees bent subtly away from the advancing darkness. Mira grabbed my sleeve. We should go. But the deer suddenly lifted its head high. The bones clattered together. The sound echoed strangely through the clearing, repeating in softer versions from deeper in the forest. Clack, 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 like other sets of bones answering. And the darkness stopped. For a long moment nothing moved. Then the deer turned. Not away from us. Toward us. It stepped closer. The bone antlers loomed overhead, their fragments forming that unnatural shape again. Something tall and branching. Something that felt far older than the animal wearing it. The deer looked directly at me. Its eyes were calm, almost gentle. Then it lowered its head. The bones pointed toward the forest behind us. Behind us, something cracked loudly. A tree limb breaking. Then another. The breathing returned, closer now. The deer lifted its head once more. And the bone crown shifted. One fragment loosened. A small curved piece, too smooth to be animal bone, slid free and fell into the moss at my feet. It wasn't bone. It was carved. A piece of antler shaped by tools. Old tools. Symbols had been etched into its surface. Circles intersecting with long branching lines. A map, or instructions. When I looked up again, the deer had already turned. It walked calmly past us and into the trees, the remaining bones rattling softly as it disappeared into the deeper forest. The shadows that had been approaching receded slowly. The breathing faded. The clearing felt empty again. We stood there for a long time. No one spoke. Eventually Mira said, very quietly, "It warned us." Jonah nodded. I looked down at the carved antler fragment in my hand. The symbols seemed almost familiar, like something I had seen before but couldn't place. When we finally left the clearing, we followed the direction the deer had indicated. We walked for hours without stopping. Only when the trees began to thin near dawn did we finally rest. That was when Jonah noticed something. "Your pack," he said. "What about it?" He pointed. Sticking out from the top flap was something pale. A thin bone fragment. I pulled it free slowly. It hadn't been there before. Carved with the same branching symbols. Behind us, deep in the forest, a distant clatter echoed faintly. Bone against bone. Then another, and another, like antlers being assembled in the dark. Something tapped on our tent from every direction at once. Not rain, not falling pine cones. A deliberate hollow talk, talk, like knuckles testing a door. I woke before the others fully realized what had changed. The forest had been full of soft night sounds when we went to sleep. The murmur of distant insects, wind stirring the high branches. Now the air felt sealed. Even inside the tent the silence had weight. Cold crept through the ground pad beneath my back. Damp earth, old leaves, and pine resin seeped through the thin fabric floor. Talk, right beside my shoulder. Then, talk, above my head. Then again from somewhere near my feet. The sound was soft, careful, as if whatever made it didn't want to tear the nylon. "Did you hear that?" Mira whispered from the other side of the tent. Before I could answer, "Talk, talk, talk." 3 taps. All around us. Jonah shifted in his sleeping bag. "Probably branches." "There's no wind," Mira said. She was right. The tent walls hung perfectly still, lit faintly by the dull gray glow of moonlight through the canopy. The trees outside were so dense that the sky appeared in narrow strips. I held my breath. For a moment nothing happened. Then the tapping started again. Not random, measured. Talk, talk, talk. A pause. Talk, talk, talk. Like something counting. The sound came from every direction at once. Not moving around the tent. Not circling. Just everywhere. Jonah unzipped his bag halfway. "It's probably animals." "Animals don't knock," Mira said. The tapping stopped. Silence dropped over the forest so completely that I could hear the faint tick of cooling metal from our camping stove outside. The woods beyond the tent should have been alive with night noises. Owls, wind, the small restless movements of things that lived under leaves. Instead there was nothing. Felt intentional. Like the forest was holding its breath. I reached for the zipper. "Don't," Mira said quickly. "Why?" "I don't know." We waited. Minutes stretched long enough that the tension in my chest started to ease. Then, talk, loud, directly above my head. The tent fabric flexed inward slightly. Jonah froze. "That was a branch," he said too quickly. Before anyone could respond, the tapping returned. Faster this time. Talk, 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 talk. From the left side. Talk, 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 talk. From the right. Then the roof. Then the floor beneath us, dull and muffled through the soil. I felt the vibration through my palm. Something was tapping from under the ground. Mira sucked in a breath. "That's not possible." But the rhythm continued. Different locations. Same pattern. 5 taps. Pause. 5 taps. Pause. Over and over again. The sound carried a strange quality. Not loud, but sharp enough to feel inside your teeth. Jonah finally reached for the lantern. "Okay," he muttered. "We're checking." The lantern flared on, casting pale yellow light through the tent walls. Outside, the forest appeared as distorted silhouettes. Tall trunks bending slightly, branches overlapping like black veins. Nothing moved, but the tapping continued. Now it sounded almost coordinated, as if several things had learned the pattern. Jonah opened the zipper a few inches. Cold air slipped inside immediately. It smelled like wet bark and old soil. The tapping stopped. The sudden silence was worse. Jonah pushed the flap open and leaned out with the lantern. "What do you see?" Mira asked. "Nothing," but his voice carried a tight edge. I crawled closer and looked over his shoulder. The clearing around our tent was small, barely wider than the reach of the lantern light. We had chosen it because it looked flat and safe between the thick trunks. Now the ground looked wrong. The moss we'd stepped on earlier had been disturbed. Not scattered, arranged. Small patches had been peeled back in curved lines around the tent, exposing dark soil beneath. Symbols. Rough circles intersected by branching shapes that spread outward like roots or antlers. "Did we do that?" Mira asked quietly. "No," Jonah said. A faint cracking sound came from deeper in the woods. Then another. Branches breaking somewhere far away. I noticed something else then. The trees surrounding the clearing leaned slightly outward, as if the forest itself had grown away from this spot. Jonah stepped fully outside. "Guys," he said slowly. "What?" "Look at the dirt." I climbed out beside him. Near the edge of the lantern light, small impressions dotted the exposed soil. They weren't footprints. They were shallow dents, round, evenly spaced, like something had tapped the ground repeatedly. 5 at a time. Mira crawled out last, pulling her jacket tight. The cold here felt deeper than it had earlier, as if the temperature had dropped only inside the clearing. We stood in silence. Then the tapping began again. Not on the tent this time. In the forest. Talk, 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 talk. 5 taps. From somewhere ahead. Then the same pattern echoed from the left. Then from behind us. Jonah turned slowly. There, answering each other. The taps multiplied. Different distances. Different directions. All repeating the same 5-beat rhythm. The sound moved through the forest like a message passing from tree to tree. Mira whispered, "It's a signal." The forest beyond the lantern light seemed thicker now. Shadows layered on shadows. The trunks looked closer together than they had earlier. Another set of taps echoed, this time deeper, heavier. The ground trembled faintly. Jonah swung the lantern toward the sound. For a moment the beam caught something pale among the roots of a distant tree. A shape rising from the soil. Long, branching. Not wood, bone. The lantern flickered. The tapping grew louder. Every direction now. Hundreds of soft knocks rippling through the forest floor, the tree trunks, even the stones. The rhythm accelerated. Talk, 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 talk. Pause. Talk, 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 talk. Then the pause shortened. Talk, 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 talk. Something was waking up. The air thickened with the smell of damp earth being turned over. Behind us, the tent rustled softly. Mira looked back. "Did you move that?" "No." The tent had shifted. Just slightly, as if something beneath the soil had pushed upward. Jonah stepped back slowly. "Maybe we should leave." No one argued. We began packing quickly, hands clumsy with cold and nerves. But the tapping didn't stop. If anything, it grew more organized. Groups of taps began aligning into longer patterns. 5, 5, 5. Then a final single knock. Punctuation. The forest answered. From somewhere deeper in the trees came a sound like roots tearing free from stone. The ground vibrated once more. We shouldered our packs and started walking fast. No one spoke. Behind us the tapping followed. Not chasing, repeating, marking. After half an hour the forest sounds slowly returned. Insects. A faint breeze. The tapping faded into the distance. Eventually we stopped on a narrow ridge where the trees thinned enough to reveal a slice of pale sky. Mira sank onto a rock. "What the hell was that?" Jonah didn't answer. He was staring at my sleeve. "What?" I asked. He pointed. On the fabric near my elbow, dried mud had formed a small imprint. 5 round marks, perfectly spaced, like something had tapped me. Once, 5 times. Mira looked down at her jacket. The same pattern marked her shoulder. Jonah turned his hand over. 5 faint bruises dotted his palm. Behind us, far back in the forest we had left, a final hollow tapping echoed through the trees. Not 5 times, just once, like something acknowledging the signal had been received.